Hi, it's March 14th. This is Eric, and I'm back with another video. So there are several developments that I want to talk about, which I hope you'll find of interest, and I try to present a kind of an angle that you may not have heard from other places. So the first thing is that there's several topics here, but they're all, of course, related. So the first thing is that as you, I don't know, many of you follow people like Judge Andrew Napolitano and Larry Johnson. These people both come from quite a conservative background. Larry Johnson was in the CIA. He was like a case officer. These are people who, are involved in operations which are not always so on the up and up, you could say. But Larry Johnson is a very principled person, and at a certain point, he basically resigned and became a whistleblower. And he's been very vocal and very, very courageous in telling it like it is in terms of U.S. foreign policy. The other person is Andrew Napolitano. He used to be on Fox News, and I always dismissed him as being just kind of a right winger. I'm not a right winger. I'm on the far left. But in any case, he's got a channel now on YouTube called Judging Freedom. And what's unique about him is that he gets people who are true independent thinkers, and they may be on the right, like Doug Macgregor, for example, Colonel Doug Macgregor, who he's a military guy. He's fought in combat in U.S. wars, but at the same time he has somehow figured out that U.S. policy is very militaristic. It's unnecessary and it's dangerous, and he's advocating that we take another path. And of course, he also has had people like Max Blumenthal and Aaron Mate, who are both progressive Jewish people who have been opposed to U.S. imperialism and also opposed to what the Israelis are doing to Palestinians. So he's a very broad-minded. He seems to be a very, very decent person, and it's really admirable of him. So apparently, they got an invitation from the Russian Foreign Ministry to visit Moscow and have a 1.5-hour sit-down with Sergei Lavrov and Maria Zakharova, both of whom, if you've ever watched them, they're very sharp, very, very sharp people. So there was a third guy there who I don't know is a younger fellow, but it was a very good conversation. But I want to touch on just a couple of items that occurred in that hour-and-a-half conversation. The first item is that Lavrov was asked what his opinion of the United States is at this point. And Lavrov says that he thinks that the United States is returning to quote-unquote normalcy. So he said that it's returning to its more traditional, you could say, Christian roots. And so my comment is, nope, that's not what he's doing. He's just switching, the U.S. is switching from one psychotic, schizophrenic, woke, fake human rights personality and swinging to the Christian fascist mentality, which is far more upfront about historical, woohoo, onward Christian soldiers, praise the Lord and pass the ammunition, manifest destiny. The U.S. is meant by God to control the world, and that's turned into Paul Wolfowitz's doctrine of full spectrum dominance, and that's basically what has been guiding U.S. policy, since I guess for sure since September 11th, 2001. So what I want to say is that when we're talking about normalcy, I would suggest that U.S. militarism is the normal condition of the U.S., with counterculture social movements like the civil rights movement or women's movements becoming increasingly with these two kinds of movements. You've got the civil rights, and you've got this is the quote-unquote left type of movement, working class movement, and you have the hegemonic far right, especially dominated by quote-unquote Christian thinking, which it's not really Christian because Jesus said turn the other cheek. He didn't say go invade and destroy other countries. So the inherent undemocratic and fascist nature of U.S. rulers should be apparent to the population, but it's not, because they're just so brainwashed that the U.S., they cook up reasons to attack other countries, and even liberals, they think, Saddam's weapons of mass destruction, we have to deal with that. And New York Times pounds it into their heads that this is a huge problem. Or Libya, Gaddafi was raping women, giving his soldiers Viagra. They cook up the stupidest reasons to invade other countries, and they do it again and again, and the people fall for it. It blows my mind that people have not figured it out and just said no. So in any case, in the below this, I've got a couple of videos. One of them is this famous song, "Praise the Lord and Pass the Ammunition." So this is hardly Jesus pacifism. Now, the moving on here, the other question that comes up is this whole freezing the conflict, this 30-day ceasefire arrangement. So Trump says he wants to be known as the peace president, and he says he wants peace in Ukraine. So that's the reason why he hired Jeffrey Sachs as the Secretary of Defense. No. Now, Jeffrey Sachs, for those of you who don't know, has been a vocal critic of the Ukraine war. He's explained exactly how it came about. It's completely provoked by the United States. It's utterly illegal and outrageous, and Jeffrey Sachs has been very vocal about it, and very vocal about what the Palestinians have suffered under the Israelis. So he's the kind of person you'd want in government, but they don't let him in government. Instead, who did Trump hire? He hired this guy, Pete Hegseth, who's a born-again, self-proclaimed Christian warrior crusader, replete with Crusader era, and we're talking about 1,000-year-old, from the Crusades. He's got these tattooed crosses on his body, and he's saying we need to have a warrior culture, and we got to prepare for war, and war is coming, and war. He's a great Secretary of Defense. Why don't they just call it the Secretary of War? That's what it used to be in World War II. But you see, they can't. They have to kind of, make euphemisms out of things. So they say, "Oh no, we're not a warlike country. We're just being defensive." But here's this guy, and he just wants to go out and kill all of America's enemies that he perceives as enemies. He's declared holy war on China, on the left. People like me, I'm sure, I'd be in jail if he had his druthers, and Islam, and so on. So so that's his Secretary of Defense, and that's at least as important as the Secretary of State. So there you go. Now, as far as the peace plan is concerned, I call this this is a toxic ball. So Marco Rubio goes to Jeddah, and they have a discussion with the Ukrainians, and they basically arm twist the Ukrainian delegation to agree to a ceasefire, which Ukraine didn't want to do. And so what I'm saying here is that this so-called 30-day ceasefire is like it's like a sale. So they set out this plan, which is like a high-pressure used car deal, or a real estate deal, or an insurance sales pitch. Buy now before it's too late. And Russia's supposed to fall for this. So you saw Trump on television, on camera, saying, we really want peace, and we hope that Russia will accept this deal because this is a really great deal. It's, we want peace, and if Russia doesn't follow through and do what we ask them to do, then we're going to have to sanction the hell out of them, and it's going to be very painful. And we don't want to do that to Russia because Russia's our friend. But we're just going to, we couldn't help it. This reminds me of the reason why I didn't vote for Obama in 2008, because at least for me, I've known that this is the standard operating procedure for whenever the United States wants to start a war. They create conditions with another country and say to that other country, "You're going to do as we say, or else we're going to attack you." And in the case of Obama, this was in the 2008 um, debate that he had with John McCain, who was his opponent in that election. John McCain said, "Oh, you, Obama, you're so irresponsible, you're going to attack Pakistan." So Obama said, we would exhaust every effort diplomatically before we would attack Pakistan, because presumably Pakistan was harboring terrorists. So what happens a week after he's elected, after he becomes president, he attacks Pakistan. So there's this tendency within the U.S. foreign policy establishment where they go, "Oh, we really didn't want to start a war, but those bad people just forced us to do it." That is U.S. foreign policy, and they always do it. Saddam, he had weapons of mass destruction. We really didn't want to attack Iraq, but he had these weapons of mass destruction. Only they didn't have weapons of mass destruction. So this is the same tactic that they're using against Russia. But the problem is that Russia is too powerful and too smart to fall for it. So what happened here? In the interest of peace, Ukraine accepts the 30-day ceasefire. And because of that noble act, the U.S. has resumed arms and technological help to Ukraine, and Ukraine continues its forcible mobilization of unwilling recruits. And Russia is supposed to take this replay of the transparently flawed Minsk agreements, which at the time many Russians and people in the Donbass, part of Ukraine at that time, objected to seriously. And indeed, at that time, Putin twisted the president of Ukraine at that time, Poroshenko, to sign the Minsk agreements when the Donbass militia could have broken the Nazi-led Kiev regime's back. The result is 8 years of broken promises and thousands dead, leading to the special military operation, another 1 million dead Ukrainians, and probably 100 or 200,000 dead or wounded Russians. And that's all because of Russia's acquiescence to trying to make a deal with the West. And they're realizing that it's not going to happen. So there's a whole backlog of confidence-building measures that Trump can and must do, starting with return of Russia's properties. At a certain point, Russia had diplomatic properties. We're talking about real estate, buildings, things of that nature. And the United States, basically, they commandeered them. It's a complete flat-out theft. And Russia's saying, we want that back. Plus, they should ask for rent, because if they're occupying something that's owned by the Russian Federation, they should pay rent. Then there's the $300 billion of stolen assets. That has to be returned, plus interest. And the reopening of consular properties and reinstatement of expelled diplomats. That needs to be taken care of. And then you have the case of the Skripals, who the British accused the Russians of poisoning. They've disappeared. The Russian government has never had access to them. And there's a whole backlog of problems that have been created by the West against Russia. So, in my opinion, the Russia should say, yeah, that ceasefires are a really good idea, but there's these other problems here that we really need to take care of. So here's the ball, it's back in your court. You start to fix this mess that you have created, and then we'll talk about a ceasefire for Ukraine. Okay, moving on here, there's another topic, which is regarding national interests. And this shows the mentality of the U.S. ruling class. So Mark Rubio was talking with Sergei Lavrov, and Mark Rubio said, we have to understand that every country has its own national interests. And Sergei Lavrov said, you're absolutely right. Every country does have national interests. But the difference between when Rubio says it, what he means is that we have national interests, and what he means is it's our way or the highway. You do it our way, or else bad things are going to happen to you. When Russia says national interest, he's saying we understand that we have national interests, but we also have to recognize that the person on the other side of the table, they also have their national interests. And in order to come to some kind of viable agreement that will work, we have to take into account both sides' national interests. Whereas with the Americans, these agreements are all based on bullying or force. And this is not a way to create a viable agreement that's going to last. So that's another issue that really needs to be discussed before the whole Ukraine problem can be dealt with. If we're going to have a discussion about a ceasefire, we have to talk whose national interest is it in to have this ceasefire, which allows the United States to rearm Ukraine while Russia sits back and just watches this happen. And also they watch how Ukraine is mobilizing more troops and so on. So it's obvious this is not a balanced discussion of national interests. Okay, now the last topic I want to talk about is something that Pepe Escobar, another really great journalist, brought up. And Odessa is a city in Ukraine. It's on the Black Sea coast. And in my opinion, Russia is going to have to take control of that city back. And here's why. Odessa was founded by the Empress Catherine the Great, and the Russian Empress Catherine the Great. It's always been considered a Russian city. It's been referred to many times as a Russian city. But the problem is that right now it's under the control of these Ukrainians who they don't even recognize Russian as a language. They are suppressing Russian culture, and here they are, in charge of a Russian city. So this is not working for the Russian population there. But there's a more serious issue, which is that the British have basically wormed their way into getting control of many of the military assets in Odessa. So you have the situation where Russia does not want to be threatened with British military assets basically right next to Russia. And it's a double insult because the Russians fought the British during the Crimean War. So now the British are back on Russian territory in Odessa, it's just a stone's throw from the Crimean Peninsula. So that is for cultural reasons, it's really important for Russia to get control of the Odessa region, and they also have to get control of it because it's unacceptable for the British to have military control of that area, which means that they have some degree of military control over the Black Sea. So those are the issues that I want to bring up, and I hope that this is useful for you. Give it some thought. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments section, and I'll see you next time.